Welcome to the April 29th episode of MSP Dispatched, your source for news, community events, and commentary in the MSP channel. I'm Orsini, as always, joined by my co-host. Well, not always, but welcome. Glad to have you back, Mr. Tony
Mostly?
Francisco. Almost always, unless we have scheduling conflicts, but I'm very happy to have you back. How you doing, Tony?
Excellent. It's great to be back. Had a quick week of travels, and I couldn't wait to get back on the show.
Well, I definitely appreciate Steven filling in for you or doing his best to fill your shoes on Tuesday. I missed you sorely, so I'm glad to have you back with us today. So thanks, man. All right, so let's get into the news. Our first story, brought to us by CPO Magazine, is talking about the record high number of zero-day vulnerabilities that have been reported by Google and Mandiant. Google and Mandiant have each released annual reports in previous years. Google had purchased Mandiant a little while back, but looking at the reports, the highlights I see here are we had a previous record high of 28 vulnerabilities, 28 zero days in 2015. In 2020, Google reported 25 of these 0 days. Mandiant reported 30. In 2021, Google reported 58. Mandiant reported 80. And we've had several this year already. For those that don't know, a 0 day is an exploit that is out in the wild that has not yet been disclosed or patched to the software manufacturer, hardware manufacturer. It's basically being actively exploited. So it's a little bit of nasty. Now, the report does say that, it mentions the idea that possibly the record number of 0 days are not because the software is less secure, but it is because we are more vigilant. We have better tools, better monitoring. Tony, you and I use software every single day. Is it better visibility, or is it just time to panic?
I was, as you were talking, I was going to hide under my desk. Yeah, I mean, you've got 2021, the 0 day vulnerabilities have more than doubled in 1 year. And we see a trend. The rule of thumb is, you hear something, you see something twice, could be a coincidence. 3 times you have a pattern. At this point, we are well past the 3 times. We have an acceleration of a pattern of 0 day vulnerabilities, which means what is the next step of this? What's the step in the evolution of it? And what's the result going to be? Are these results actually reported? And that's part of what the show is about, is talking about not just the vulnerabilities out there, but what is the vendor accountability? How are they acknowledging it? How are they reporting this to the users out there that are being affected?
And the part that strikes me is, the MSPs have the constant battle with their clients. Security, we need to do security. We need to have better tools. We need to have more strict policies and procedures, the people policy and people process and procedure, but yet we have very real data showing that it is getting more and more difficult to be secure. It does strike me, as long as we call these things 0 days, and as long as we, give names like Heartbleed and stuff like that, the general public is not paying attention to it. It is the MSPs. I know for a fact I've had to explain what a 0 day is to other MSPs. Actually, for a definition here, I Googled because I went through 3 or 4 different sites and they had 3 or 4 different definitions, all around the same general concept. But I actually went back to my friends at Huntress and to Jason's Live and said, give me your answer. What do you describe a 0 day as? And that's the definition I finally went with. But we can't even settle on what security terms are. How can the general public be any... How can they hope to keep up if we can't settle on basic terms and basic practices?
Well, I mean, those basic terms are used as a way to communicate something that was maybe out of the reach of comprehension of the normal person. And let's talk about a decade ago, which wasn't that long ago. 2 decades. I mean, having an iPhone with a pin on it a decade ago was, oh, well, I guess we have to be forced to do that. 15 years ago, having a pin on your phone was absolutely unheard of. Think about how short of a time period, of a small window that we just talked about, having a pin on your phone. And it's 4 digits. It's not facial recognition. There's no biometrics involved, but it is security. That is a major point that has been out of reach of or out of discussion of the common pedestrian. And that should be an everyday best practice. I'm really interested to see if the naming convention becomes less relevant and more of the reporting, the vendor accountability, more of the hey, here's the repercussions, maybe a policy developed by at a government level of these zero-day vulnerabilities being exploited, and more importantly, being reported. That's actually one of the stories we're going to talk about later today. I'm really interested to hear about it, Ray. So you're gonna be a critical part of that. But it goes back to that point of zero-day vulnerabilities should terrify everyone, but with best practices, communication. I think that could be mitigated substantially.
So why don't we get off the scary boogeyman for a minute and talk about fun stuff like unicorns?
Unicorns. Well, in the news, as relayed by MSPtoday.com, Threatlocker raises a Series C $100 million raise, which is impressive. Enterprise security solution provider Threatlocker just raised $100 million in that Series C funding that the company officials say will be used to accelerate product innovation and increase global reach of its endpoint security solution. This is led by the global growth equity firm General Atlantic in a partnership from the initial investor. Quote, we believe that this new injection of capital will enable us to improve our product and grow our Threatlocker's market presence, said Threatlocker Danny Jenkins. Ray, how do you see this? Is this an investment in the MSP community's core pillar, security, which we just got done talking about? Is zero trust going to be where the new unicorns, where all the big players are going to be involved now? Because that is the future.
So, in my opinion, and it's not my own opinion, but I'll speak for me. Um, we have two pieces to the coin here, right? We have the technology used to monitor, block, prevent, alert. The full stack. The software that makes those things capable, and then we have the training and the expertise needed to implement those tools. um, like you were talking about with the previous article, the talking about pins didn't really become a thing until Google said we're going to require them. iPhone said we're going to require them. It wasn't an option. Now you have to. So you know now we look back at stuff like Threat Locker. There's others in the space, right? Auto Elevate, Password Boss. They all do these things to varying degrees, right? They each have their own value propositions. But the idea of being able to do ring fencing and to secure applications based on hash or based on whatever signatures, that's fantastic. But it comes back to tools like Threat Locker and others. It's not just them. They're useless, or they're not as useful out of the box. Um, Hell, I'll use my own example. Before we started today, I was messing with my camera to get it to stop autofocusing, so I wasn't blurry every episode. That took a little bit of reading the manual and changing settings. So out of the box, it wasn't just that. It wasn't working properly out of the box. I had to adjust it. Threat Locker and these other tools are the same thing, which requires training of MSPs to implement them properly. I think the investment is fantastic. I think it's wonderful. I would like to see similar investments in the training of MSPs, like what NSITSP is doing, to get the MSPs there, so this stuff can become effective.
Absolutely. Community investment through in education, not just through education through exposure, but the almost the proactive versus reactive education is going to be a critical part. And I'm interested to see how that's going to be implemented in the MSP community. Interesting point though. Maybe that f-stop issue with your camera, was that a possible zero-day vulnerability?
So I do use an end of life camera, so it very well could be, but it is not internet connected. My camera is air gapped, unless something can go through HDMI, and then it is time to grab the towel. So at that point, grab the towel, don't panic, and all that fun stuff.
No, there's going to be a lot of great things happening in the community, and there is a little bit of community rift that we've reported on in this show. And Ray, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've seen Kaseya has put out their merger and acquisition strategy. We are seeing them speak more publicly about their strategies. Um, this website, which we'll link in the show notes, lists their track record on what they've done with IT Glue, what they've done with ID Agent, what they've done with Rapid Fire, Rocket Cyber, True Methods, Graphis, Unitrends. There are notably missing some other services that are speculated to be owned by Kaseya. But these are the most notable. These are the ones we all talk about every day. And they mentioned things like 37%, 370% growth, 50 million in additional R&D. Every single one of these has lowered pricing as lowered pricing as something they mention on every single one. And now I look at this stuff, Tony, and we have this. We had Fred Ricola was on stage with Robin Robbins speaking at her event on the merger or the acquisition of Datto. This strikes me as an immediate response to the Goodbye Datto website that we spoke about previously, talking about where the Datto acquisition and all the previous acquisitions for IT Glue customers, possible negative effects that happened out of that. Tony, I get the feeling that while it's great to be public about your mergers and acquisition strategy, I do get the distinct feeling this is a direct response to all the public outcry we've seen in the communities. We've seen with the Goodbye Datto ad campaign, that we've seen in the social channels that Kaseya normally stays out of. They have a notable lack of presence in Reddit, in our MSP, in many of the MSP Geek, in many of the Discords. Do you think they're starting to take notice of that community outcry?
It is amazing how paralleled the Kaseya responses line for line in the goodbyedado.com cover page. I am simultaneously inspired by their ability to address it with factual statistical information. But I'm also tentatively cautious that I don't know, does that correlate to involvement in the community? Or are we starting off at just the awareness of the community? Was Kaseya ever aware of the community prior to this point? Possibly, but we haven't really seen much involvement from them, as you've mentioned. The next question is the merger with Datto, which is very community focused. Is that going to have an influence in the existing Kaseya's architecture of not being involved or engaging with the community? Is this the first step of that process? I mean, we're not even the first foot isn't all the way through the door yet in that acquisition process, but we're already seeing right there that you just showed an addressing a community line for line against, frankly, not the most positive feedback out there based on the merger itself. So I'm really interested to see what the outcome will be, but I have a lot of hopes and I'm cautiously optimistic about the Datto influence inside Kaseya and their ability to engage, acknowledge the community that, frankly, Datto has been a critical part of since the beginning.
And something, and you're absolutely right. I'd love to see Datto is the polar opposite of Kaseya's strategy when it comes to public education, when it comes to being out there in the community. Rob Ray is nothing short of a phenom. Ryan Weeks is out there weekly. Sorry, no pun intended. But Ryan Weeks is out there on the cyber calls, and other events. Speaking to the public. But they're also in the community circles as well. And so when I look at Kaseya that purposely avoids many of these, and they're not unique. I want to be clear. There's other. I've been made aware of other vendors that purposely avoid certain community circles, and I will say those community circles. As a moderator of our MSP, those community circles, you shouldn't just put anybody in there. You should put people that are trained to handle or trained to speak in those kind of communities. But it seems to me the juxtaposition of public figures like Rob Ray and Ryan Weeks, and then you have Kaseya that's strategically only speaking in their chosen arenas, right? So you have like their president, CJ Wimley, who's been having meetings with Datto partners to talk about the the acquisition and what to expect going forward. We've had quite a few reports of that. So it's very interesting and something I would definitely want to keep an eye on. And we'll report as we get more information. And as always, if anybody from if anybody from Kaseya or Data would like to be on the show to discuss, just hit us up, news at mspmedia.tv, and we'll be happy to have you on.
We love that communication. However, there are types of communication that are probably not the most positive. Ray, do you have anything you want to talk about?
Yeah, the so we reported on Tuesday about some vulnerabilities that were disclosed. Not They were not disclosed properly. Instead of going to the vendor, we're talking about Hudu, IT documentation, password management. Instead of going to the vendor and saying we found these series of steps that uh, can lead to data leakage, instead the person went to Reddit and posted on 3 different subreddits not only the vulnerability but the exact steps to replicate, making a 0 day. So thank you, not thank you for that. Now Hudu in their Hudu being a community partner, a good vendor, they patched it within 24 hours. There was an additional security issue the next day, and that was responsibly disclosed from the MSP community. And Hudu patched that within 2 hours. So, which is great. It's absolutely fantastic. But there were comments on Tuesday's story, and we want to put this up here. There was an opposite point, and I definitely want to mention it. I'll read it quickly. It reads from Just Some Guy regarding responsible Hudu disclosure, as stated by the Reddit user who made the disclosure in a follow-up comment on their post. Paraphrasing, they're not a security researcher. It's just another hat they were trying to wear for the company. Accordingly, it stands to reason they may not be familiar with the standard of the 90-day responsible disclosure timeline and other vulnerability reporting processes. Additionally, I've scoured the Hudu website and am unable to find anything other than a generic contact email address to get in touch with them. Regardless of the nature of the concern, if they want to encourage responsible disclosure, then they need to step up their game and publish proper process for reaching their security team. It's silly to impugn anyone for failing to follow some unwritten process. So, in my personal opinion, Hudu owns most of the failure for this one. Also, as a Hudu admin, I can tell you I'm not happy with their own disclosure to their customers upon learning of an issue. Had it not been for the original Reddit thread I happened to come across on Sunday, I'd still be clueless as to the fact that my data was ever at risk. I want to see an RCA or other report advising exactly what was vulnerable and for how long, as well as how to audit my account to ensure none of my data was exposed or leaked. Responsible disclosure goes both ways. If you find the Reddit user at fault, then by the same measuring stick, you have to find the vendor at fault as well. I did respond to the user on the YouTube comment, but I absolutely appreciate this opposite opinion. I completely get it. Um, you know, if there are instructions but you don't know, then how are you supposed to handle it? Now, I will go back and say we're MSPs, we're held to a higher standard. If you have enough, you're not a security researcher, but if you have enough knowledge and experience, as he said, it's another hat he wears to find these things, then you probably have enough knowledge and experience to go email the vendor, and you can understand the ramifications of posting this out public. I think going to rush to Reddit and disclose these things, I still think it was a little brazen, a little brash. I do think it was reckless, in my opinion, where he, as an MSP, if your clients had, all were using the exact same password, you wouldn't go post that on Reddit. That's not the right thing to do. But I do want to hear everybody's comments, so I absolutely appreciate it. Tony, you didn't have the benefit of the back and forth on Tuesday. What do you think about this? With going back and forth and or the way it was disclosed on Reddit?
Just thinking the peripheral impact, the unforeseen impact of disclosing something like that actually fuels the black hat people out there that are going to use this for malicious purposes. Privately disclosing something to the company that's obviously having the issue would close up and minimize the exposure out there. So the question is, of all the undocumented people that have acquired this vulnerability, what were they able to do during that time, during that small window? Were they able to exploit data? What is the peripheral impact that we're not going to see or hear about for quite some time? And that's the part that terrifies me. That vigilantism. Let me show you how. Let me prove my value by showing publicly this massive vulnerability out there. That's a nice snapshot of notoriety for that individual, but the peripheral impact, which is negative, by the way, far outweighs the benefits of that moment of fame. It would have been much better, and this goes full circle back to the vendor accountability that we've literally been focusing on in the show from the beginning, of telling the vendor, and the vendor should, from that point, communicate. We would like to thank anonymous person in this case for informing us about a vulnerability that we were not aware of. It has been fixed, and we greatly appreciate the community's effort to making us stronger for the betterment of everyone. So that's my opinion, and I hope it resonates with everyone out there. But it's incredibly important to understand the peripheral impact of those actions.
I agree, and just as a point of clarification, I agree with you, and I agree with the commenter. Um, any ability to show how to go back and look and audit to see, how long was it disclosed, how long, what data was possibly affected, things you would have to do anyway. When you're researching the potential impact, any way the vendor can make it easier, even better. Those things were not done in Hudu's disclosure, and we did relay that comment back to Jacob, the founder of Hudu, Jacob Hart. So he did. He is aware of it, of that request, and we, as with all things, whenever we report, we always give the vendor an opportunity to respond. And in this case, we did reach out to Jacob for additional comment on the event, and he did give us some answers. Before we do that, though, I want to share the release notes that went out, and this was the email that went out to all the users of Hudu. They went out for both updates. This is the latest. It does say it fixes bugs allowing signed users to bypass audit trails. I'm not going to comment on if that's enough, and fixes for bugs allowing portal members to bypass password restrictions. I'm not going to comment on if that's enough detail for the average user to understand the severity of what the issue is. I personally would have liked something a little more bright, eye grabbing to say, hey, this is a very important. But those are there. It's up to each user's individual opinion. Now, I had reached out to Jacob before. They do have a vulnerability disclosure program. Like the original commenter, I had gone to their website and looked for VDP, bugs, security, trust, all the usual things you would see on their main website, and it's absent from that. Now, this is also mentioned to Jacob. They do have a VDP in their support portal, their knowledge base, but if you don't know to search for it there, you're not going to find it. And I am a Hudu user. I consider myself an advanced Hudu user, and I didn't know it was there. So I completely get it. This is one of those things that should be front facing on the website. Having in the KB, and I'm guilty of that as well. We put stuff in our own KB that probably should be on the website. It's an oversight on the vendor's part, and I completely understand it. We do have some Q&A. We're only going to go through 3 of the questions to save time. We want to be respectful of our viewers' times, but we're going to go through 3. The full Q&A that we have with Jacob Hart at Hudu will be listed in the show notes as well, and if open to comments on YouTube and everywhere else. So our first question we have that I had asked Jacob was, can you describe the security issue? Give us a little more detail what happened. He says there were 2 issues at hand, one regarding being able to bypass our security auditing framework, and the second bypassing portal member permissions. Both did require a user to be signed into the Hudu server, but were serious nonetheless. Which is nice because they are taking accountability for it. If it bypassed the auditing framework, I am concerned you're not going to be able to see what exactly was affected. Maybe at least timeline wise, you can tell. The second question is, when were you first made aware of the issue? It says we were first made aware of the issue of the post Saturday afternoon by multiple customers submitting a link to the social media post. That shows, and again, he did release an update within 24 hours. That just goes to show, Hudu was never contacted. That was my original question. Hudu was never contacted by the actual person that found these issues. And then our third and final question: did the Reddit poster or anyone else contact you before posting to Reddit? No, we were not made aware prior to seeing the post, nor after by the same submitter. So even after posting on Reddit, he still never reached out to Hudu at all. I do question motives when it comes to stuff like that, but at least we have answers directly from the vendor, and we have a lot of learning points that the vendor, that Hudu and others can learn from, including ourselves. So it's nice to see, and we appreciate that feedback. With that, I think that takes us out of the Friday, April 29th episode of MSP Dispatch. Tony, thank you so much for your amazing insights and keeping us from panicking.
I've been patching everything for 0-day vulnerabilities before they're happening, which I don't know if that's possible, but in my mind's eye, I see it somewhere. Now, this is a great show as always, Ray. Thank you so much, and I'm really hoping this is going to be a great weekend. I'm looking forward to the news next week.
Absolutely. And we do have a few things coming up. Why don't we show the community events coming up for today and next week? We'll leave those up on the screen for a little bit. So MSP Dispatch, as you know, will be moving to Tuesday, Friday schedule to allow for getting better quality stories, a better opportunity to research those stories. If you attend any of the events, we'll have links in the show notes below, such as the Lifecycle Insights events or the Channel Pro SMB forum. Please let us know how it was, and we want to hear from you. news@mspmedia.tv. And with that, I think it's a great way to close. You have a great rest of your weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next week, Tony.
You too, my friend. Take care, Ray, and everyone in the community.
This has been a broadcast of the MSP Media Network.